I'm going to start with the opening brachas for all of us. Just have the bracha in mind. I'm having you all in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. V'arevna Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeim amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratav lishma. Baruch atah Adonai lemei Torah l'mo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
About a case where somebody's stone knife or burden were on the roof, and they came down and they landed and they did damage upon landing. Again, if a person's object, the stone knife or burden, damaged while they were moving, this is a clear case of fire, because it took another force, being the wind, and it was mixed in there, and then other force is what caused the damage. If it came to rest, it's a clear case of pit, because it is prone to damage from inception at the place at which you created it. Okay? We're talking about a case which is a combination of both, where it was blown off a roof in a normal wind, and came to rest, and at the point where it rested, it damaged. Again, it wasn't a pit where a person created it on the ground or left their object in that particular position, and that's why it's a combination of fire and pit. And on that particular basis, a person is responsible by using the common characteristic of fire and pit. Now, there's no problem according to Shmuel and Rav if a person declared it ownerless. So, for example, if it wasn't a screwdriver, but a person left a brick on top of a roof, and that brick came down and then landed and did damage upon landing and not while in motion, otherwise that would be fire. Nobody is going to claim a brick as their property because it's not that worthwhile. In that particular case, when it is ownerless, there is no problem, both with Shmuel and Rav, who said if an obstacle damages in the public domain that's ownerless, you're responsible. According to Shmuel, whether it is your property or not your property, if it damages in the public domain, you're responsible for the payment. Okay, once it creates a hazard because it's prone to damage from inception from a stationary position. And Rav said, if it is your property, that is a bit of a problem because it doesn't resemble a pit. Again, what is a pit? A pit is something where somebody created a hazard in the public domain and left it, and it causes damage. This is not somebody's property that one takes care of. So in that particular case, this argument came in 3b1, which comes to say that sometimes the torda, which is a person's stone, knife, and burden, where somebody actually cares about, for example, a person's carving knives, etc., it is a problem to Rav. So Rav would take a combination of two damages. What would he take? He'd take ox and pit. And why would he take ox and pit? Is because ox is your property, and the obligation of watching your property is on you. And if you want to say the unique feature of ox is it goes forth to do damage, and therefore it's not analogous to pit. Pit comes to prove that going forth to do damage is not necessary for culpability of responsibility, because if we study a pit, it can damage from a stationary position. And what pit, when you say pit is ownerless and does damage, you can say if it's your property, you're still obligated to pay for that damage, because we use ox as a reference to know that if it is your property and it causes damage, you're responsible to pay. So in that case, what happens is Rav uses a case of both pit and ox to prove that you pay on an object that you own. Now, obviously, the case of fire is brought here to prove that if it had moved with another force, it is still your responsibility to pay. And why does Shmuel say the same thing? Because if it did not damage from the place that you created the damage, you could turn around and say, well, I never created the damage there. I never left my object there. I never created the pit or the hazard in that place. And it damaged of its own volition. and therefore I'm not responsible, of which you can turn around and say that quite clearly, if it was fire responsibility, just because it damaged in a place not your own, it does not mean you're not responsible, because it was your obligation to watch your object. And if it blew in a normal wind and it came to land to do damage, you're as responsible as if it damaged while in movement, according to fire. Is everybody clear with this so far?
Yes.
Good. Arthur, you clear?
Yeah,
Gav?
yeah. Sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah.
Right. Kevin, are you clear?
Yeah. Just that's a lot to absorb. Yes, yeah.
It is a lot. Listen, the only difference between today and yesterday that we learned is this object of revision for 3b. And with 3b, why does he come to mention ox? It's very simple. Ox is your property, and if your property damages, you're responsible. So according to Rav, who says that standard pit damage on its own is about ownerless obstacle that you create, and therefore he comes to also bring ox, because when we learned from ox, and he said, well, maybe it's an object that you left in the public domain that's prone to cause damage from inception, like something valuable that is not ownerless, we come to say that you're also responsible, just like your ox is your property. So this object that you left in the public domain, which is a hazard, is also your responsibility, and you have to look after it. So he used a combination of pit and ox to prove that you're responsible. But Rav and Shmuel both agree that if it's ownerless, it's a classic case of pit. So, guys,
ask you something.
Yeah.
So Shmuel would just use pit whether it's ownerless or whether you own it, either way.
Correct. So Shmuel says exactly like Gavin, what you were coming to say is that whether it's ownerless, or in a case where you dig a pit, or it's your property, like in a Torda of pit. Let's say somebody left their knife, and it's a Swiss Army knife that's a limited edition. He's not giving up ownership of it. It's a hazard in the public domain, and therefore you pay. He doesn't see any issue with it.
So he doesn't require to
bring the common characteristic.
Two damages, right? Yeah. He doesn't have to combine two damages like Rava does. Rava does it because of the fact that he doesn't. Rava does it because of the fact that he doesn't accept ownership as being pit.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, because the classic case of pit is something that's ownerless. Nobody declares that's my pit and I'm proud of it. So he wants to, when you're talking about the Torda of pit, meaning somebody's valuable object, he wants to say it's not quite analogous to pit, who's ownerless. So he'll bring the case of ox and use it in combination of the common characteristic.
So would he do that even if you left like a couch? If you're busy unloading your furniture and you left your couch, is that similar to the Swiss Army knife? Same thing?
Yes, great example, great.
Okay.
It's more difficult to trip over a couch because you'll see it. Generally, a pit is something that looks like the ground, like a pothole, until you drive over it. If you see a couch in the highway, it's more difficult, but yes, that would be a case, absolutely.
Okay, no, just checking. It sounded the same. I just wanted to make sure.
Absolutely. It's a good example. All right. So let me just unpack this for you, and I'm going to read it exactly. A buyer said it comes to include the case of one stone, knife, or burden that he left on his roof, and they fell down in a normal wind and did damage. Since this case is not exactly analogous to any single category of damage, it must be derived from the common characteristic. So the Gemara analyzes the case more closely. So what were the circumstances? If they, meaning the person's property, the stone, the knife, or the burden, damaged as they were moving, this is merely a subcategory of fire, and the common characteristic should not be required to teach liability. For how is fire different from these falling items? It is that there's another force, i.e. the wind, mixed in with it that inflicted the damage. And it's your responsibility and your property and the obligation of watching it as anew. But if it's true that these objects mixed as well, there's another force mixed within them. That so this can't be a case. So rather, you will say that they're damaged after they came to rest. So that's also problematic, because if an object damages after it comes to rest, then it's clearly a case of pit. So how's pit different to these items? Because from its inception, it's prone to damage, and it's your property, and the obligation of watching it is on you. So one of the issues here is that it has another force mixed within it. Basically, it didn't damage in the place that you created the pit. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
It moved. So it is a combination of both. If it was a projectile while a wind took it, and it was a normal wind, you're responsible under H. If you just left it in the public domain, it would be a classic case of pit. But because it was on your roof and it fell and then landed and caused the damage, it's a combination of both. You needed both factors. Okay? Now, there's an important point I want to bring to you guys. So, sometimes in the Gemara, the unique feature of involvement of another force is sometimes a reason to favor in terms of exemption, and sometimes it's an argument for liability. Let me just explain to you what I mean in the issue of hand. Again, let's just take this. We're talking here about another force, okay? So we're saying another force. When is it a time when you're obligated? Well, we're saying that if you place your object on the roof and it blows off in a normal wind, that other force is a reason to favor liability because it's a classic torda of fire. Does that make sense? Why? Because the owner should have realized that you've got a concave roof and a normal wind would take this thing off and it could damage as it's coming down and land on somebody or land on somebody's property. So this is just like an unguarded fire where you've got to realize that the wind is going to take it into the neighbor's field and damage his property. So here we see the involvement of another force like the wind or gravity as a reason to make one liable because you should have known better. This is not an unusual wind. But initially, when you look at, for example, a pit, it would be a reason for exemption. Why? Because another force is implying that it never got damaged in the place where I left it. And therefore, generally, a classic case of pit says, I created the obstruction in this place. Because I created the obstruction exactly in this place, where I left it is where it causes damage. Remember, it's prone to damage from inception, in the place that you left it, and it's stationary. So therefore, the fact there's another force involved with it is a reason to mitigate or exempt liability, because it's not the place that you left it. And that's why you need a combination of fire to obligate the movement of it in natural circumstances where you should have known better, as well as pit, damage from a stationary position in unison. The common characteristic of both of them together to prove involvement in this particular case, that you're responsible. Am I making sense, guys? Can I go to the next example?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody have any question? Kevin, Gavin?
No, I don't have anything, but I can always watch this again as well. So.
Okay, you don't understand it, or you don't have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I'm just...
okay, that's fine.
I'm going to watch it probably once or twice more. No,
everybody does, but the point of it is you don't have any questions because so far it's clear. Now, the second case is brought by Rava.
Okay.
Rava. This is not Rav, Gav, Rava.
Rava, I'm listening.
Rava. Okay.
Yeah, Rava is Shmuel's guy.
There's Rav and Shmuel. Rava is a student of Shmuel. He was also Shmuel's uncle, by the way. And Shmuel was such a genius that Rav schooled him to overtake him, Rava. So, Rava was absolutely genius. It was Shmuel's uncle. Okay. So Rava brings this second characteristic. You have Abaya and Rava. They're of the same sort of era. Okay? So Rava brings the second case. What's it coming to include? The common characteristic is expounded to include the case of pit that is rolled about by the feet of men and the feet of animals, to teach liability for a case in which an object left the public domain, did not cause damage, and in the place that it was left and was unintentionally rolled to another place by the feet of passerbys and damaged there. Okay, now, can you see how similar this is to the first case?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why is it similar?
Because it's there's movement.
Well, it's similar because a classic case of pit, exactly that, is that a classic case of pit is it damages from inception at the location that it was at. So the first example showed that the man didn't create that initial hazard in that place. And the second one is saying he did create an initial hazard in the place, but the place where it actually damaged moved. Just like a fire moved it and created a hazard in a new location.
Okay.
So too in this case, the guy could turn around and say, listen, if my hazard was damaged in the place I left it, fine, I'm obligated. An animal moved it or a person kicked the ball in another location and an old woman fell on the soccer ball. In that particular case, I never moved it to the new place there. Therefore, I'm not responsible. So this is talking about the same as the other one, that the damage was not prone to inception initially, but it was you initially were responsible for causing that hazard, and it moved. And if you never caused it to start with, or you were never negligent, you wouldn't have had a problem. Okay? So what is this analogous to? This has to use another force. Now, this case, we cannot use a force of fire. Why? Because it wasn't a wind that moved it. It's not a force that is within the scope of a tornado of fire. It might be another force, but it is more analogous to what goes forth and moves.
Regel.
Correct. Yes.
Because Karen is forced, is deliberate, so this is not deliberate. Shane is self-gratification, it's not self-gratification. So the only one you got left is normal movement, which is regular, and this is normal movement.
It can be
normal movement. You're prone to kick stuff up as well.
It can be all three. Let me give you an example. Gabb and Regel would definitely count. The reason why all three would count is as follows, right? Let's just look at this again. Okay, again, Shmuel, there's no argument because whether it's your property or not, if you create a hazard in the public domain, you're responsible. According to Rav, ox, because it's your property and therefore anything your property causes damage to, you're responsible. But let's take a case of Karen, Shane, and Regel. It's important to know this. Regel for sure, because Regel moves. And in the fact that it moves, it creates damage. Okay? That's fine. But Shane also does. In other words, when Shane moves and it creates damage, because if it's in my field, it moves to your field in order to eat. And when it moves to your field in order to eat, it's the same pasuk that deals with Shane and Regel. Do you remember? Exactly the same pasuk. And that pasuk is what? That it goes forward, he sends forth, or the animal goes forth, and then it eats. So the animal tramples with its foot in the normal way that it walks, but Shane, it eats in the field of another, meaning it goes forward to eat in the field of another, whether you've taken there or not. So the animal is actually moving. We said that every damager moves with the exception of pit. And here it's your property. Let's take a course of Karen. Karen for sure moves. Why does it move? In order for intent to do damage or kill, it goes to gore. That is proper movement. Gavin, that is proper movement. So it doesn't, again, how does goring inflict so much damage? It's taking a running charge, or it's butting with its head. So all three cases of ox are considered in the Gemara to be movement. Compared to pit, what is pit? We already said that pit is stationary. So for sure Regel is counted, but so is Karen as well as Shane. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but Karen, you'd have a firstly, Karen is definitely it's deliberate. I mean, it's intentional. Whereby when you're walking along, it's not intentional. Number one. Okay, but you've also got a problem with half damages.
You're missing the point on your first point. The second point is relevant, but we'll answer that now. The first point in terms of Karen, in terms of intent to damage, Pitt comes to prove. That's why you use the common feature. Pitt comes to prove that you never intended to do damage. You either left your object in the public domain and it causes damage, or it's prone to damage from inception, but it was not intentional, meaning you were thoughtless. You never intended to damage. Why? The proof of it is pit. You can't know whom it's going to damage in the pit. You create a hazard that could damage anybody, whereas the ox knows exactly who it's coming to attack. Okay, it's focused. No, you're missing my point, Gav. You're missing my point. The common characteristic proves that the one cancels out the unique features of the other. It's called the common characteristic because they're both prone to damage, and it's your responsibility to watch.
Okay, so you're saying the common factor only. Okay, all right, that's fine.
Yes. So the unique
so then you can
feature.
Use all three of them. In theory.
Just let me finish. If you want to say, but the unique feature of Keren is that its intent is to damage. I can prove to you that intent to do damage is not a reason why we obligate for Keren. Why? Because pit, you're responsible for payment, and its intention is not to do damage. Why? It does not go forward to do damage, number one. And number two, it can damage anybody that fell in a pit, whereas an ox, your property, decides whom it wants to damage. It attacks somebody specifically. So it's not, you would need to prove that it's not the intent to damage or the focus of the damage at which you have to pay. It's the common characteristic that it is your property and it's your responsibility for paying. So why did Rava bring the case of a pit that is rolled about by the feet of men and the feet of animals? Is because the man's objection is the obstacle was in its original spot that caused the damage, and he could say that that's not where he left the damage. And according to Rav, who brings Rava's case, that the ox goes forward to damage, whether it's in Keren, Shane, or Regal. Why? An ox goes forward to consume, according to uses the same pasuk as in Regal. It walks in its natural way, it damages, or Keren, it runs to charge with intent to do damage. Anything to do with ox is your property. It goes forward to do damage, and it's your responsibility for look after it. And that is the way that you obligate pit. In this case, where you created a particular damage in one place and it moved. Because an ox, in fact, does move. It's your property. And then according to Shmuel, who says whether it's your property or not, there's no issue specifically, because you're responsible whether it's your property or not. But he brings ox. Even Shmuel brings ox in this case, according to Rava. Why? Rava, according to Shmuel, because in this case, it's not damaging from the original spot. It's not prone to damage from inception. It has moved. And therefore, you need ox to come and prove that even when an object comes to rest, you can bring ox in unison to say when an object goes forth to damage. Again, why? Because a person never created their object. Their object has a mind of its own, and it went forward to damage. And here it's a case of a men or another ox that moved that obstruction to a public place. So you use ox in unison with pit of the common characteristics to prove liability. Does that make sense, Gavin? I do agree with you that Regal is a perfect example. I'm just saying it doesn't exclude Keren and Shane.
Okay.
Why?
And then what about the Tam and the...
Excellent question. So
Tam and Moab, sorry.
Yes, that's an excellent question. So here we could take a case of, for example, the classic case of Keren being a Moab animal. It doesn't have to be a case of Tam. The reason why the Torah does bring a case of Tam is to prove the leniency. Okay, that's why it's mentioned as a unique feature. But it doesn't cancel it out to be used as a combination feature when we don't focus on the unique characteristic. So we could say that the Keren is talking about a Muad ox in this particular case. And even if you want to say that in this particular case it's a Tam ox, we're coming to prove, what are we coming to prove? That whether an ox is Tam or Muad, the fact of it is you still pay for damage when your creature goes forward to damage. In other words, your property goes forward to damage, you pay. Whether or not there's a leniency or not, there's not an exemption, you still pay. So, and there's only certain cases of leniencies with regards to tam, but you'd use the common characteristic. It's your object that went forth to damage, you pay. And you can talk about a muad ox in this case. You are completely correct that the Torah comes to bring Keren as a case of bringing the unique feature of the leniency of the tam factor. But it doesn't mean it excludes it by being used as a common characteristic.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Let's just quickly hit the third and the fourth if possible. So, let's take a third case. Rav Ada bar Ahava talks about the common characteristic which taught in the following brisa. With regards to all of these whom the sages said that they have permission to cast potentially damaging items in the public domain, namely those who may open their waste pipes and shovel out their septic pits in the public domain. Their permit is qualified as follows. During the summer season, they have no permission to do so. During the raining season, they have permission to do so. And though they do so with permission in the raining season, they cause damage, they are liable to pay. So let me just tell you what it's analogous to. Say you've got Eskom gas, okay? Or you've got the municipality, and they're busy doing roadworks. They have permission by the municipality to be there. That's correct. They don't have permission to damage your car. For example, if they didn't use the barrier tape properly and you damaged your car in a hole that they caused, okay, they had permission to work on their road. They had no permission to damage your car. Why is this brought in the case of pit? Because you didn't even have permission to build the pit. You had no permission to create a pit. So why is this case brought? This case is brought very simply because here they had permission. So you think if they've got permission, then they're not responsible for that damage. Because again, so nobody's entitled to in the public domain start to chisel out concrete in the road or to create a pedestrian walkway hazard. They have no permission to work in municipal area, in public area. So you would say that's the reason, that's the unique reason which obligates us. And what in a case when they do have permission? So this case is coming to bring a case when they have permission to work in the municipal area, but they cause damage. So they'd have no permission to damage, even if they're allowed to work in that area. So what we say is why the rainy season? Because in the northern hemisphere, the rainy season is in winter. So in winter it rains. So you can open up your septic tanks. What happened is everybody had their own septic tank because there wasn't proper plumbing and ablution facilities. And that septic tank would have to be emptied out. It couldn't be emptied out in summer. Why couldn't it be emptied out in summer? Because the soil was dry and it stank of feces. So when it was raining, the rain would kind of wash it clear and the area was muddy anyway. So you weren't making the public domain smelly or looking bad or going from dry to soggy. So only during winter when it was the rainy season could you open up your septic tank and let the rain wash it away because the soil was wet anyway. But you had no permission in summer to do it. But it's not the permission that the lack of permission that causes somebody to pay with damage of pit. It's the fact that they damage something in the somebody else's property or somebody. That's what causes them to pay. And that's why you needed this particular case. Now, if we get cut off, guys, I just want to finish. It'll take 5 minutes. The fourth example, then we're done with the duff. We're already on 682. I don't want to hit the third one a day. We can finish this. I just need 10 more minutes in case we get cut off. If that's okay with you guys, please. Yeah. I'm asking you.
I've got someone at 11:10.
11:10. Okay, so let's just then hurry this up. Okay. So, again, there's two different sort of waste. One is that the guy that's cleaning his sewage pit throws the damage and it lands on a girl's dress. That's a tilde of man, because it's like man wielding a baseball bat or spitting on somebody. That's mave. That is a pure case of mave. So then you would use a case of mave, and if it came to rest, the sewage, and somebody slips on it, that's a case of pit. Okay? So you would need both cases to show that it's not the permission, it's not the permission that caused the problem. So nobody would cause waste to be ownership. So even Rav, I don't think, would have a problem with this case because nobody wants to claim surage. It's all ownerless. And if it's all ownerless, you have to pay, both according to Rav and Shmuel. Again, nothing about surage is precious. Okay? Let's just hit another, we're on 6A3. Okay? Let's just hit 6B1 and talk. How much time have we got left, Kev?
4 minutes.
Fine. All right, let's quickly start the fourth case. The fourth case is by Ravina, and it's talking about if a privately owned wall or tree fell in the public domain, the owner is and caused damage, the owner is exempt from paying. So what happens is if the court notices that it's going to be an impending danger and hazard, he gives the owner a certain time period by which to cut down the tree or demolish the wall. And if it fell within the time, he's not liable. Why? Because they gave him a deadline. If after the deadline he didn't do the correct sort of fixing up, he's completely responsible. Why is this not a classic case of pit? Is number one, it's not ownerless. So a Rav would use it in unison with ox, naturally. And even Shmuel has said it's obligated, whether it's your ownership or not, to pay in the public domain. Remember, if it fell while injuring, it's a case of fire. If it's already fallen and then causes damage, it's a case of pit. But the case of it is, why is it in this case mixed and not perfectly according to pit? Is because a wall doesn't intend to do damage. You never built it to do damage. A wall is functional. A tree is functional. Do you get what I'm saying? It's not a classic case where you create it in the public area. It's in your private area. Once a wall or a tree falls, it then damages.
Okay.
It's not prone to damage from inception. It's prone to function from inception. It only damages when it's already deteriorated from the passage of time. Do you see, guys? That's why it's used in unison.
Yeah. No, it's definitely not a straightforward pit. I agree with you.
It's not a straightforward pit. It's a functional wall. It's not prone to damage from inception. It's meant to protect your property or give you fruit or something. So it's a combination of both of these that helped. By the way, in the case of the sewerage, it's found in Bava Kamma 117b. All right. So on 6.2b, we're going to hit 6.2b next time. Does this make absolute sense, guys, what we're dealing with here?
Yeah, it's fairly clear.
I'm cool.
It's actually fairly clear. Yeah?
So the wall, it was built for a specific purpose. That's why.
Yes, and it was functional. Yeah. It wasn't prone to damage from inception. It was prone to be functional. It was going to protect your property. It wasn't in the public domain. It was a tree was going to give you fruit in your property. It wasn't in the public domain. For the passage of time, it deteriorated and it fell. And at that point, you're responsible. But you know what? Even if you don't have if the wall is clearly about to collapse, the owner must still remove it even without a court order. In other words, if everybody else can see that it's about to fall and they haven't issued a court order and it falls, you're responsible. I'm talking about when it's that sort of hectic case. It's not where it's possible could fall. Because why? Because you are responsible for it, even if it had a function to start with. Guys, it's been lovely learning with you.
Thanks. Damon. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks,
have a good day.
Have a great day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah.